A biting Colorado wind sliced through the snow-choked cemetery as Rachel Adams stood in front of the flag-draped coffin of her only child. Every inch of her body ached with cold and grief, but nothing could numb the agony of watching strangers, military men with faces locked in stone, lower her daughter, Captain Eliza Adams, into the ground. The world was silent except for the crunch of boots on snow and the keening wind as it swept across boulders rolling white hills. But there was another sound, sharp, insistent, desperate. Bark, bark, bark. Eliza's German shepherd, Echo, lunged against his leash, claws carving trenches in the icy earth, teeth bared at the casket, as if something monstrous lurked inside. He wasn't just barking. He was howling, pleading, warning. The veins on Echo's neck stood out, his tail straight and bristled. Rachel, stunned and shivering, tried to hold Echo back, but the big dog was stronger than grief and heavier than memory. A pair of uniformed guards flanked the coffin. Their eyes, as cold as the air, never met hers. When Rachel reached for the casket, desperate for one last touch, one final goodbye, they blocked her, faces expressionless. "I'm sorry, ma'am," one said, voice clipped. "It's best you don't see her. The damage is severe." Rachel's heart lurched. She tried to protest, but the words stuck in her throat. She'd been told the story 3 times now. Eliza was killed in a covert mission overseas. Classified. Details above your clearance. No body viewing, immediate burial, and the death certificate was already signed. Nothing felt real. Not the funeral, not the snowy morning, not the weight of her black coat. Just Echo, frantic, trembling, refusing to leave the casket, even after the brief, clinical ceremony was over. Rachel knelt by Echo and wrapped her arms around his shuddering body. He wasn't just a dog. He'd been Eliza's partner in combat, her shadow, her shield. Trained for battlefield intelligence, Echo could sniff out bombs, follow coded commands, and sense danger where no one else could. And now, he refused to let Eliza go. Rachel pressed her face into Echo's neck, the only thing warm in this endless white world. "She's gone," she whispered. "She's gone, Echo." But Echo wouldn't be comforted. He barked again, short, sharp, like Morse code. Something wild flickered in his eyes. He dug at the casket lid until his nails split, then looked up at Rachel as if begging her to understand. A military chaplain began ushering people away. The small crowd, mostly men Rachel didn't know, no family left but her, shuffled off, leaving only Rachel, the dog, and the closed coffin. Rachel stared at the casket, mind spinning. What if they were lying? What if something worse had happened? Why wouldn't they let her see Eliza's face? Her hands, red and raw, fumbled at Echo's collar to lead him away. Her fingers brushed something cold and metallic, his ID tag. She turned it over, expecting the usual etched numbers and contact info, but there, beneath a smear of greasy fingerprint, was a message scratched in uneven lines. "Don't believe the burial." Rachel's breath caught. She blinked, convinced her eyes were playing tricks in the glare of snow. She wiped the tag with her thumb, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. "Don't believe the burial." She glanced at Echo. He stared back, steady, silent now, chest heaving with each anxious breath. A sudden memory stabbed her. Eliza, 6 years old, had once hidden in the linen closet after a nightmare, refusing to come out until Rachel promised to believe her story, no matter how unbelievable. "Even when everyone else thinks I'm making it up, promise you'll believe me first, Mom," Eliza had pleaded. Rachel had promised, and kept that promise, until war took her daughter away and left her with only medals and a uniform in a box. Now, standing by the coffin, she felt that same impossible tug. Believe, even when belief makes you look crazy. A white-gloved hand landed on her shoulder, making her flinch. "Ma'am, we need to close the area," one of the guards said, almost apologetic, but his eyes darted over her shoulder to Echo, as if the dog were the real problem. Rachel nodded, dazed, and let Echo pull her back toward her battered sedan. But at the edge of the cemetery, Echo planted his feet and refused to move, eyes locked on the casket as the last of the military men lowered it into the earth. Rachel tugged the leash, her patience threadbare. Please, Echo. Please." But the big shepherd spun, dragging her a few feet closer to the grave, barking again, 3 rapid, then a pause, then 2 more. Rachel's breath fogged in the frozen air. The cadence struck something deep in her. A pattern, a warning, a call. She sank into the snow beside Echo, tears streaming down her cheeks, ignoring the stares of the remaining soldiers. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered. Echo pressed his nose to the ground, whining. Then, with a suddenness that sent shock through Rachel's bones, he turned and nudged her hand, forcing her to notice something wedged in his collar. Rachel's numb fingers pried out a small, folded slip of paper, the edges soft from moisture. She unwrapped it, heart hammering in her ears. A single sentence, written in shaky but unmistakable handwriting. Eliza's handwriting. "History erases the loud. Follow silence." Rachel's mind reeled. What did it mean? Was it a code? A cry for help? A goodbye? The ground seemed to tilt under her. Her daughter was supposed to be dead, and yet the evidence was screaming, no, barking, that something wasn't right. Behind her, the last spadeful of snow landed on the grave, sealing it. The guards, stiff and impersonal, saluted and turned away. Rachel staggered back to her car, Echo still restless at her side, his gaze never leaving the closed earth. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't just grief twisting reality. There was a message here, a truth clawing to get out. Rachel gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, and stared at the paper, the tag, the trembling dog beside her. Something in her broke open. She wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not to her daughter, not yet. The choice burned inside her. Should she dare go back, even in the dead of night, and open the coffin herself? Was she brave? Or desperate? Enough to uncover whatever secret her daughter had left behind. Outside, the snow kept falling, silent and endless. But Rachel Adams knew one thing for certain. She would not believe the burial. Not until she had proof. Not until she found out what really happened to Eliza. And as Echo leaned against her, Rachel understood. This was just the beginning. The wind howled around Rachel's small cabin on the edge of Boulder, rattling the windows like the impatient fingers of some invisible stranger. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, Echo pressed close at her feet, her mind racing with questions she dared not speak aloud. The message from the funeral still burned in her pocket. History erases the loud. Follow silence. Every few minutes, Echo would look up at her, his amber eyes filled with something that looked like hope. And something else. Something urgent. Rachel's grief had always felt like a slow-moving avalanche. But now anxiety crackled in her veins. She hadn't slept in days. Her daughter's face, smiling, determined, far too young, floated behind her eyelids every time she tried to close them. That afternoon, a battered Jeep pulled into her driveway, tires crunching in the snow. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Through the frost-blurred glass, she saw Nina Scott step out, bundled in a gray army surplus coat, a shock of curly hair poking from beneath a knit beanie. Nina had been Eliza's roommate during basic and her best friend ever since, practically family. But lately she'd gone quiet, almost as if she were afraid to even be seen near Rachel. As Nina knocked, Echo leapt up, tail wagging, then froze, ears flattened, hackles rising as if he sensed something unusual. Rachel opened the door, letting Nina inside, along with a gust of icy air. "Rach." Nina's voice was hoarse, cautious. She hesitated, casting nervous glances at Echo. "We need to talk. Now." Rachel poured coffee, her hands shaking so badly she spilled some on the worn formica. "Did you know?" she asked in a low voice. About Eliza? About any of this?" Nina stared into her mug. "I know something's wrong. I didn't believe the official story, not for a second. And now, after what you found," she slid her phone across the table, screen unlocked. "I have to show you something." A string of encrypted voicemails played. Eliza's voice, shaky but fierce, crackled through the speaker. "Nina, if you get this, I'm being followed. Don't trust anyone, not even command. There's something bigger. If anything happens to me, you need to find Echo. He knows. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. The voicemails continued, each one more frantic, the last cutting off mid-sentence as if Eliza had been interrupted. Rachel could hardly breathe. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to listen again and again. She was scared, but determined, Nina said softly. She wanted someone to know, someone she trusted. Rachel felt the floor tilting beneath her. What did she mean? Echo knows? I think, Nina said, voice trembling. She meant we should listen to him. Literally. As if on cue, Echo let out a low, throaty growl and padded to the back door. He glanced over his shoulder, then whined, a sound Rachel had heard only a few times, always when Eliza was in trouble. Rachel pulled on her coat and boots, and Nina followed, flashlight in hand. The cemetery was deserted by night, the snow reflecting the moonlight in an eerie blue glow. Rachel's heart pounded as she and Nina crept toward Eliza's grave, Echo leading the way with the certainty of a dog following a command. He sniffed the earth, pawed at the soil, and then looked up at Rachel with a piercing gaze. Nina hesitated. Are you sure you want to do this? Rachel nodded, unable to speak. Together, shivering, they began to dig, first with their hands, then with the little shovel Nina had brought, just in case. The earth was still loose, the burial rushed, the coffin surprisingly shallow. They worked in silence, the only sounds the scrape of metal on wood and Echo's soft panting. Finally, the casket's lid appeared, its brass handles shining dully in the moonlight. Rachel's fingers trembled as she pressed them to the edge, praying she wouldn't find what she feared. With a soft groan, they pried open the lid. Inside, instead of Eliza's body, there was only a neat, folded slip of paper and an American flag. Rachel's legs gave out, and she nearly collapsed, caught only by Nina's steadying grip. She reached for the paper, unfolding it with shaking hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eliza's again. History erases the loud. Follow silence. Beneath the note was a single flash drive, taped to the inside of the lid. Rachel grabbed it, hope and terror crashing through her in equal measure. Echo, who had been frantic all night, suddenly sat, calm and composed. His tail thumped once on the ground, and he looked directly at Rachel, as if to say, You see, I told you. Nina glanced at her, wide-eyed. This means she's alive, doesn't it? Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. It means she's out there somewhere, and she wants us to find her. Echo pressed his head into Rachel's hand, and for the first time since the funeral, she felt something like hope flicker inside her. If Eliza was still alive, there was a reason for all of this, some bigger truth they hadn't seen yet. Back at the cabin, they plugged the flash drive into Rachel's laptop, hands shaking. The screen flickered to life, displaying a map with storage unit locations and a series of numbers, codes perhaps. Beneath the map, a single line glowed in bold text. Trust Echo. He knows the way. Rachel stared at the message, remembering Eliza's father, Dean Adams, who'd vanished during a Black Ops mission nearly 20 years before. Everyone had told Rachel to accept it, to move on, but she'd always felt something unfinished, something left unsaid. Now, looking at Echo, sitting tall, eyes bright, she wondered, had Eliza discovered something that connected their family's past to this present nightmare? Nina leaned in, voice low. Whatever Eliza was working on, it's dangerous. She trusted you. And Echo, that means something. But we have to be careful. They'll come looking for us if they know we've opened that casket. Rachel nodded, resolve building inside her. She glanced down at Echo, who met her gaze with steady certainty. We're not alone anymore, are we? A sudden noise, a branch snapping outside, made them both jump. Echo moved to the window, growling softly. Rachel's stomach clenched with dread, but also with a sense of purpose. Whatever Eliza was trying to expose, whatever she'd uncovered, Rachel would not let her daughter's warning be erased. As the night deepened and the first hints of dawn colored the snowy world outside, Rachel knew that the real story was only beginning. She would follow the silence, as Eliza had asked. She would trust Echo, and she would find the truth, no matter how dangerous it proved to be. By the time the morning sun crept through the curtains, painting pale gold stripes across the cabin floor, Rachel Adams had made her decision. She wasn't going to wait for answers any longer. Not when her daughter's voice was still echoing through Nina's voicemails. Not when the military had tried to bury her questions as quickly as they'd buried the empty casket. She hardly recognized herself in the bathroom mirror, eyes swollen from crying, streaks of dirt still under her nails from digging in the snow. But the determination in her reflection was unmistakable, a glimmer of the woman who'd raised a soldier and survived heartbreak before. She was done sitting still. Nina was already awake. Typing furiously on her laptop, she looked up, worry lines etched across her forehead. "We have to be careful." "There are probably eyes on us already, Rach." Rachel nodded, glancing over at Echo, who sat by the door, his ears perked, always alert. He'd hardly slept, and every creak of the floor made him jump. But he was also a calming presence, grounding her in reality. If Echo believed Eliza was alive, then Rachel would too. They barely had time to discuss their next move. A knock, sharp, insistent, rattled the front door. Echo's body stiffened. He growled, lips curling. Rachel motioned for Nina to hide and ducked behind the kitchen counter, heart pounding in her chest. Two men stood on the porch, both in crisp, unmarked suits, their postures too rigid to be casual. One flashed a badge Rachel didn't recognize. The other kept his hand resting on something at his hip beneath his coat. The air around them buzzed with menace. "Miss Adams?" The taller one called out, his voice flat. "Official. We're with military affairs. There's a problem with your daughter's burial paperwork. We need you to come with us to clarify a few things." Rachel's mind raced. No way were these men from the military's bureaucracy. This was intimidation, not protocol. She took a step back, silently signaling to Echo, who crouched low, ready for anything. "I'm not interested," Rachel called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Send me a letter." The second man's expression hardened. He stepped forward, hand now fully gripping the weapon beneath his jacket. "Ma'am, we insist." Before Rachel could reply, Echo leaped forward, barking so fiercely the men actually flinched. The lead agent raised his hand as if to shoo the dog, but Echo didn't back down. His barking was measured, almost like a signal. Rachel took the opportunity. "Nina, back door," she hissed. Nina was already moving, grabbing the flash drive in her backpack. Echo dashed between the men and the women, snapping and snarling, buying precious seconds. They bolted through the kitchen, boots slipping on the hardwood as they scrambled for the back door. Rachel snatched her keys, nearly dropping them in panic. Echo was at her heels, but Rachel glanced back to see the two men crashing into the living room, guns drawn, shouting for her to stop. She and Nina ducked out the back door and tore through the snowy yard. Echo, with his training, veered off to the right, barking in a strange rhythm. Rachel realized, with a surge of gratitude, that he was laying a trail, confusing their pursuers. "Follow Echo!" Rachel gasped, yanking Nina after her toward the narrow deer path that cut behind the property into the woods. The dog darted ahead, weaving between aspens, stopping just long enough to make sure they were close behind. Behind them, the men crashed through the snow, cursing and firing a warning shot into the air. The crack of the gun echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering. Rachel didn't dare look back. For nearly a mile they ran, lungs burning, legs aching, hearts pounding. The cold bit at their faces, but adrenaline and fear kept them moving. Rachel slipped once, crashing into the snow, but Nina hauled her up, both of them spurred on by Echo's constant barking. Finally, the trail opened up to a clearing, an old hunting lodge standing at the far end, half buried by drifts and nearly invisible from the main road. It was a place Eliza had used for training drills. Rachel recognized it instantly from her daughter's stories. They stumbled inside, collapsing against the wall, gulping in air, hands shaking. Echo padded in behind them, sniffing the dusty air, then immediately began circling the room, nose to the ground. "Did they follow us?" Nina whispered. Rachel peeked through a crack in the boarded window. No sign of the men, yet. But she knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up. Echo's behavior shifted, his hackles lowered, tail wagging slightly, as he sniffed around a warped section of floor near the old stone fireplace. He pawed at a loose floorboard, whined, and looked up at Rachel. She dropped to her knees, feeling along the edges until she found a small notch. With Nina's help, they pried up the board, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside was a metal box, battered but locked tight. Rachel pulled it out, heart pounding as she fumbled with the latches. Echo sat, watching intently, his body tense but hopeful. The box creaked open to reveal a hard drive, a bundle of faded photos, Eliza and Dean Adams smiling in the sunlight, and a folded map with storage units marked in red ink. There were also a handful of old, battered dog tags, each with cryptic numbers and phrases engraved on them. Nina plugged the hard drive into her laptop, fingers flying. It was encrypted, but the password prompt included an odd hint. Bark twice. Wait. Bark once. Echo barked twice, paused, then barked once. Nina typed the sequence in Morse code, and the drive unlocked. A video loaded, a grainy recording of Eliza, eyes wild but voice steady. She was talking to someone off camera, accusing them of building the Foundation, a covert cell manipulating military actions for political power. "I know what you've done," Eliza said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You think you can erase history, but people always talk, even the ones you try to silence. If anything happens to me, Echo will lead them to the truth." The video ended abruptly, replaced by another message in bold text. "Trust Echo. He'll bring you home." Rachel stared at the screen, barely breathing. Nina squeezed her arm. "She's alive, Rachel. She planned this. She wanted you to find this." Echo leaned against Rachel's side, solid and warm, as if to say, "I've got you. We're not done yet." Outside, the wind picked up, howling against the fragile windows. Rachel knew the men in suits wouldn't give up, but for the first time since her world shattered, she felt something powerful and bright flickering inside her. A sense of purpose. She glanced at Nina, then at Echo. "We run. We follow the clues. We trust Echo, and we don't stop until we find her." The hunt had begun. The lodge's shadows lengthened as dusk fell, the fading light painting streaks of gold across the battered floorboards. Rachel paced the room, hands clenched, trying to make sense of everything: the hidden message, the encrypted drive, the relentless pursuit. Nina, hunched over her laptop, was scanning the files for anything that might help them understand Eliza's trail. Echo lay near the secret compartment they'd uncovered, alert but calm, his eyes never leaving Rachel. The quiet in the lodge was strange after the chaos of their escape. For a moment, Rachel let herself sink into the musty armchair near the window. Echo nudged her knee, sensing her exhaustion, and Rachel rested her hand on his warm fur. "We're safe, at least for now," she whispered, though her heart refused to believe it. Outside, the wind rattled the lodge's loose shutters, a reminder that the world beyond these walls wasn't safe at all. Nina called softly, breaking the silence. "I think I found something." She angled the laptop so Rachel could see. On the hard drive, nested deep inside a labyrinth of encrypted folders, was a file named Dean_last. Rachel's breath caught. Dean Adams, her husband, Eliza's father, had vanished almost 20 years before, swallowed by a Black Ops mission no one ever explained. The pain of his loss had never truly faded. Now, trembling, Rachel watched as Nina unlocked the file, using the dog tag code from the box. The video that played was raw, jumpy, clearly filmed in secret. Dean, gaunt but unmistakable, looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, something's gone wrong. The Foundation. They're not just manipulating missions, they're rewriting history. If Eliza found out, they'd come for her, too. I did what I had to." He broke off, staring off screen, then whispered, "Rachel, I'm sorry. Protect Eliza. Trust no one but Echo. He knows our secrets." The screen froze on Dean's face, haunted and desperate. Rachel felt tears burning her eyes, but forced herself to hold them back. She ran her fingers over the video's last frame, aching for a time when their family had been whole. Nina broke the silence. "There's more. Look at this." She pulled out the folded map from the box. Red X's dotted several spots across Colorado and Utah, each marked with strings of numbers, coordinates, dates, and cryptic phrases like Storage 9, Silence, Unit 14, Only with Echo. Beside the map were old photographs, Eliza and Dean together, laughing at a summer barbecue, posing at a remote trailhead, training Echo as a puppy. Rachel smiled through her tears at the sight of her daughter's beaming face and the strong, proud man Dean had once been. Then, at the bottom of the box, Rachel found another note in Eliza's handwriting. If you've made it here, you know what you're facing. I had to disappear, but Echo can lead you to the truth. Find the next cache. Don't trust anyone, not even the old guard. Rachel's mind raced. She's telling us there are more clues, more proof, she said. Nina nodded, already typing the coordinates into a mapping app. The next one is only a couple hours from here. We can leave after dark, stay off the grid. The gravity of their situation hit Rachel in waves. Her daughter was alive, but in grave danger. The men chasing them were ruthless, and whatever Eliza had uncovered about the Foundation was enough to put all their lives on the line. While Nina prepared for their next move, Rachel sat beside Echo, the cold creeping up from the floor. You've always known, haven't you? She murmured, stroking his fur. Echo whined, licking her hand with a gentleness that cut straight through her fear. He was more than a dog. He was family, guardian, and now their only guide. Suddenly, Echo stood up, sniffing the air. His ears pricked, he padded over to the far wall and began sniffing along the baseboard. Rachel followed, curiosity and dread mixing in her chest. Echo stopped at a loose panel and pawed insistently. Rachel knelt and pried it open, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside was another cache, a battered notebook filled with Eliza's handwriting, a stack of memory cards, and a faded photograph. In the photo, Eliza stood beside a woman Rachel didn't recognize, blonde, intense-eyed, with a scar across her cheek. On the back, Eliza had written, "Trust is earned. Not everyone is who they say." Rachel tucked the photograph into her coat pocket, glancing at Echo. "Who is she?" she whispered, knowing Echo couldn't answer, but somehow feeling he understood the question. Nina skimmed through the notebook, eyes widening. "Listen to this," she read aloud. "If you're reading this, you're close. They have eyes everywhere. Dad warned me, but I didn't listen. I had to make them believe I was dead. But I'm not finished. Echo will guide you. Don't be loud. Don't make history. Be silent like the code." Rachel shivered. The words were a lifeline, a promise that Eliza was still fighting, still reaching out, but also a warning that they could trust no one. Even in the quiet, danger lurked. That night, as they prepared to leave, Rachel sat alone by the dying fire, lost in memories of Dean and Eliza. She remembered Eliza's stubbornness as a child, her fierce loyalty, her endless curiosity. She remembered the day Echo came home, a gangly puppy with more heart than sense. She remembered Dean's laughter and his silences, and the last thing he'd ever said to her, "Promise me you'll always listen to your instincts. Promise me you'll protect Eliza." Rachel hadn't been able to keep that promise, not when it counted, but now, with Echo beside her, she had a second chance. She rose, pulled her coat tight, and joined Nina by the door. Echo was waiting, his tail wagging in anticipation, ready to lead them into the night. "We'll find her," Rachel whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "no matter what it takes." The lodge faded behind them as they disappeared into the darkness, Rachel, Nina, and Echo, carrying the hope of reunion and the weight of truth. The journey ahead was perilous, but for the first time since the funeral, Rachel felt a sliver of faith that her family's story wasn't over. That somewhere, in the silence, Eliza was waiting to be found. The night was long and silent as Rachel, Nina, and Echo drove west through winding mountain roads, the headlights cutting swaths of pale yellow across snowbanks and pines. The world outside felt frozen in time, as if the chaos that had engulfed their lives could not reach this lonely stretch of highway. In the back seat, Echo alternated between resting his head on Rachel's shoulder and keeping his nose pressed to the window, always watchful. Rachel's mind replayed Dean's message over and over, every word scraping at old wounds. She wondered if she'd ever stop feeling like she was one step behind a mystery designed to break her heart, but she pushed those thoughts away. Her daughter was alive, and now there was a path to follow. Their destination was a rundown motel in rural Utah, marked as Motel Crane on Eliza's hand-drawn map. The drive took hours, the tension rising with every mile. Nina kept checking the rearview mirror, worried they might be followed, while Rachel reread the coded notes from the notebook, searching for any clue she'd missed. As they crossed the state line, the sky was streaked with hints of dawn, and a pale blue light crept across the horizon. The motel itself was the kind of place you only stopped if you had no other choice. Weathered wood siding, flickering neon sign, cracked asphalt in the parking lot. The office was closed, but one room, number 12, had its blinds drawn and a faint sliver of light leaking under the door. Echo bristled the moment they stepped out of the car, tail high, ears pricked forward. He led the way, nose low to the ground, as if the answers were hidden in the scent trail. Rachel hesitated before knocking, heart hammering in her chest. Nina reached for her arm, giving a reassuring squeeze. "We're together," she whispered. "We can handle whatever's inside." The door opened before Rachel could knock a second time. A man stood silhouetted in the yellowish glow of a single lamp, older, stocky, face craggy and lined, moving with the awkward stiffness of an old injury. He wore a faded army jacket, the sleeves too long for his thick wrists, and leaned heavily on a cane. "Rachel Adams." His voice was rough, the kind that had smoked too many cigarettes and seen too many bad days. "Name's Victor Crane. Dean sent me." The words slammed into Rachel with the force of a tidal wave. Her knees threatened to buckle. Victor stepped aside, motioning them in with a grunt. Echo sniffed at his boots, then wagged his tail, a cautious greeting, but a greeting nonetheless. Inside, the room was small, cluttered with stacks of old files and empty coffee cups. Victor slumped into a battered armchair and gestured for them to sit. "Dean always said you'd be stubborn enough to come looking, said you'd trust the dog more than any of us." He chuckled, the sound bitter and weary. He was right. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Is my husband alive?" Victor looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "He's alive. Hurt, but alive. Been in hiding for years. Always moving." "The foundation. They've got long arms. But Eliza, she was different. She found a way to get close, to dig up what they wanted buried." Nina leaned forward, her notebook open. "What did she find?" Victor rubbed a hand over his face, eyes suddenly haunted. "They're not just rewriting missions, they're erasing people. Good men and women. Dean's unit was one of the first to get chewed up by it. Eliza picked up the trail, found evidence of high-level fraud, weapons siphoned off for black projects. She got too close. They tried to silence her." Rachel's throat closed. "The funeral. The empty casket." Victor nodded. "She planned her own death." With Echo's help, the Foundation's got agents everywhere, lawyers, soldiers, even some brass. You can't trust anyone who claims they're there to help, not unless they know the code. Rachel's mind reeled. It felt like every answer only bred more questions. Echo suddenly barked, a sharp, deliberate rhythm. 3 short, 1 long, then 2 short. Victor's eyes widened. "That's it. That's the old signal Eliza taught him, her way of saying she was being watched. We used to use code barks for emergencies." Rachel knelt beside Echo, feeling his fur bristle. "Is she in danger right now?" Victor's face darkened. "I think so. Last message I got from Dean said Eliza was onto something big. Next thing I know, I'm told she's dead. But then I get a flash drive with her voice on it, telling me to wait for you. Said if Echo found you, it meant the mission wasn't over." Nina plugged in the flash drive, and Eliza's voice filled the room, tense but focused. "Victor, if you're hearing this, I might be dead, or I might be hiding. Tell Mom to trust Echo, to keep following the storage units. There's more. Barrett is compromised. Don't go to the authorities. If Dad is still alive, tell him I love him." Rachel felt her heart split open at the sound of her daughter's voice. Echo leaned his head against her knee, as if anchoring her to the moment. Victor handed Rachel a small slip of paper with another code and address. "This is the next storage. It's dangerous. Barrett, he was Dean's commanding officer. We trusted him. That was a mistake." The Foundation's got ears everywhere. The door rattled suddenly, a heavy fist pounding on the other side. Victor tensed, eyes darting to his duffel. "We need to move. Now. That's not housekeeping." Rachel scooped up Echo's leash, grabbed Nina's arm, and together they slipped out the bathroom window, just as the pounding grew louder. Victor hobbled after them, muttering curses. They sprinted across the icy parking lot, ducking behind a line of frozen shrubs as two men in dark coats barged into room 12. Echo pressed close to Rachel, chest heaving but silent now, well trained for danger. Rachel's breath frosted in the air as she looked to Nina and Victor. "We go to the next storage unit," Rachel whispered, "but after that, we find Eliza. No more running. We finish this." Victor nodded grimly. "You're your daughter's mother, all right." They slipped away into the pre-dawn gloom, four fugitives bound together by loss and loyalty, chasing hope down the lonely highway. And in the darkness, Echo led the way, never looking back. They drove through the morning, the road snaking west beneath dark pines and rising sunlight. Victor, stiff and silent in the front seat, kept one wary eye on the side mirrors. Nina navigated with one hand, the other clutching the latest storage unit dress. Rachel sat in the back, her hand always resting on Echo's broad shoulders, finding comfort in his steady presence. The dog's head rested on her thigh, his ears alert and his eyes darting from window to window, as if he too expected trouble at any moment. The next storage facility was on the outskirts of a small mountain town, surrounded by woods so dense that the only sounds were the crunch of snow under their boots and Echo's soft panting. The sign above the gate read Pine Haven Self-Storage. Rows of corrugated metal doors stretched into the trees like a forgotten military outpost. Rachel's pulse quickened as they found Unit 14. The code Eliza had marked, "Only with Echo." Victor checked the lot for any sign of followers. Nina worked the lock, hands trembling. Echo circled them, nose twitching, and then let out a single sharp bark. Rachel recognized the pattern. It was the signal for safe, but hurry. Inside the unit was a battered metal trunk, its edges rusted, army stencils faded but still legible. Rachel knelt and opened it, heart pounding. Inside, beneath a layer of old uniforms, they found a thick file labeled Project Foundation, intercepts, stacks of coded documents, and a smaller lockbox. There was also a field radio, its antenna broken, but its battery replaced with something newer and unfamiliar. Nina was already scanning the documents. "These are intercepted communications. Dates, times, locations." She must have been watching them for months, she said, voice hushed. "There's a roster here. Names I don't recognize. And Colonel Barrett." Her finger stabbed at the page. Rachel's mouth went dry. Barrett had spoken at Dean's memorial, shaken Rachel's hand, and promised that her husband's sacrifice would not be forgotten. She remembered his calm, authoritative presence, his eyes that never quite met hers. Now his name appeared again and again, always linked to movements, cover-ups, and coded transfers. Betrayal lanced through her like a knife. Victor's face darkened as he read over Nina's shoulder. Barrett was Dean's friend once. He sponsored Eliza for the intelligence program. If he's involved, hell, this goes all the way to the top. Suddenly, Echo's ears flattened. He began to growl, the sound deep and low. Rachel stood up, heart hammering, and peeked out the door. A black SUV was pulling into the lot, headlights off. 3 men in tactical gear poured out, moving with crisp efficiency. One wore a patch Rachel recognized, the old unit symbol from Dean's days in the field. "They found us," Victor whispered, already limping toward the back of the unit. "We have to go. Now." Nina snapped the documents into her bag, and Rachel gathered the lockbox and radio. Echo darted out ahead, barking in a strange, broken rhythm. Another code. "He's signaling a trap," Victor hissed. "He's warning us. Get ready." Rachel and Nina followed Echo around the side of the storage facility, ducking low as the men began to sweep the units. From the tree line, Echo led them to a narrow path hidden in the snow. They scrambled into the woods, just as the SUV's driver spotted movement and shouted. A gunshot echoed, splintering the still air, but they were already running. The woods swallowed them whole, branches clawing at their coats, snow crunching beneath their feet. Victor led the way, surprisingly nimble despite his limp. Nina struggled to keep up, breath coming in ragged gasps. Echo ran point, tail high, leading them deeper and deeper until the sounds of pursuit faded. They found temporary shelter beneath a rocky overhang. Rachel could see Echo's breath pluming in the cold as he sniffed the air, always vigilant. Victor leaned against the stone, his face twisted in pain, but he shook his head when Rachel moved to check his wound. "It's just old scars. We need to talk. Fast." Rachel pressed. "Why would Barrett want us dead? What does he get out of this?" Victor's jaw clenched. "Power, control, money. It's always the same. But with the foundation, it's about rewriting the story. They erase good soldiers, steal resources, and turn heroes into ghosts." Eliza was getting close. That's why she had to disappear. Nina sat down, still breathing hard, her hands shaking. What if they find us? What if Barrett already knows every move we make? Rachel glanced at Echo. The dog stared at her, ears up, waiting for a command. She remembered Eliza's message. Echo can recognize certain voices. Don't trust anyone he won't approach. It was then they heard footsteps behind them. Soft, practiced, deliberate. Colonel Barrett emerged from the darkness, flanked by 2 agents. His gun was trained on the group, but his face was almost sorrowful. "Rachel, I wish it hadn't come to this," he said, his voice familiar and cold. "But you should have left it alone." Echo let out a furious snarl and backed away from Barrett, hackles raised. He refused to approach, his entire body language screaming danger. Rachel's heart dropped. This was the confirmation she needed. Barrett motioned to his men. "Take Nina. She's the only one without a military record. The rest, bring them in, alive, if possible." Victor lunged forward, swinging his cane with surprising force, catching one agent off guard. Nina tried to run, but the other agent grabbed her, wrenching her arm behind her back. Rachel instinctively stepped in front of Echo, ready to fight, but Barrett shook his head. "Don't make this worse. I respected Dean. Don't force my hand." But Rachel didn't freeze. She grabbed a smoke canister from Eliza's emergency stash, one they'd found in the lodge cache, and pulled the pin, hurling it between Barrett and his men. Thick smoke exploded, obscuring everything. Echo barked in a wild rhythm, guiding Rachel and Victor through the chaos, while Nina twisted free from her captor and disappeared into the trees. The agents fired blindly, but Rachel trusted Echo, following the sound of his barking until they broke free of the smoke and stumbled deeper into the woods. The forest was alive with shouts and curses, but Echo never slowed, weaving a path through the undergrowth, always circling back for Rachel. When they finally stopped, Victor gasped for breath, and Rachel collapsed to her knees, clutching Echo. Her whole body shook, not just from fear, but from the jarring realization that the people who should have protected her family were the very ones trying to destroy it. Nina was gone, captured or lost. Barrett's betrayal was now painfully clear, but so was Echo's loyalty. Rachel wiped her eyes, then hugged the big shepherd fiercely. "We can't doubt ourselves anymore," she said to Victor, voice trembling. "Echo's all we've got. We have to finish this, for Eliza, for Dean." Victor nodded, his face set with grim resolve. "We go forward, no matter the cost." And as the sun faded behind the trees, Rachel felt a new determination burning inside her. They weren't just running, they were fighting back, and Echo would lead them through the darkness. Snow fell in thick, drifting sheets as Rachel and Victor pushed deeper into the woods. Their breaths plumed in the frigid air, and the hush of the forest pressed in around them, muffling even the distant echoes of pursuit. Echo, ever vigilant, led the way, sometimes veering off to investigate a scent, sometimes pausing to make sure Rachel was still close behind. Victor's limp grew worse with each step, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to slow them down. Each minute felt like an hour, every branch a possible sign of a tale, every shadow a threat. They moved cautiously, guided by the map Eliza had left, her careful scrawl now smudged and damp, but still readable. The next coordinates pointed them toward a remote airstrip, a relic from the Cold War era, hidden in a valley flanked by steep, snow-choked ridges. It was a place for smugglers and survivalists, the kind of place only someone like Dean Adams would remember. As the sky deepened to a cold, bruised purple, the trees thinned and the land opened onto a flat expanse of frozen asphalt. The airstrip was ringed by tumble-down sheds and a single, squat hangar with rusted metal doors. Echo stopped suddenly, nose twitching, tail stiff as a flagpole. He barked once, low and hopeful. Rachel's heart hammered in her chest as she took in the sight. Victor raised his head, scanning the airstrip with sharp, suspicious eyes. "Stay alert. If Dean's here, he won't show himself until he's sure it's safe," he muttered. They crept closer, Echo leading. Rachel's boots slipped on the ice, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. All her grief, all her hope, crashed together as she rounded the hangar, and there, hunched in the shadows, was a man. He was thinner, older, and carried himself with a limp that matched Victor's, but Rachel would have known him anywhere. Dean Adams looked up, his face pale and lined with pain, one arm hanging useless at his side. His other hand held a pistol that shook ever so slightly. "Rachel?" His voice was barely more than a whisper, disbelieving. Rachel's legs buckled. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then with a sob, she stumbled forward, Echo charging ahead of her. The shepherd whined with pure joy, his tail whipping like a flag, as he pressed his head to Dean's trembling hand. Dean dropped the gun and knelt, awkwardly, painfully, pulling Echo into a fierce embrace. The shepherd licked his face, paws on Dean's shoulders, his body vibrating with excitement. Rachel covered the distance in 3 desperate strides and threw her arms around her husband. For a long, trembling moment, the world shrank to just the 3 of them, broken, battered, but together again. Victor stood guard, his eyes scanning the perimeter, but even he allowed himself a tight smile. Rachel pulled back just enough to look Dean in the eyes. Is she... Dean's face twisted with grief and guilt. "She's alive, but she's in danger. Crow has her. They're moving her to a black site. We don't have much time." "Crow?" Rachel echoed. "Who is she?" Victor answered, his voice grim. "Annalise Crow. Ex-intelligence, now working for the Foundation. She plays both sides, but her loyalty is to whoever pays the most." "She's the one who set you up, Dean. And she's the one who took Eliza." Dean nodded, rubbing Echo's head with a shaking hand. "She's already moved Eliza twice. If she leaves the country, we may never find her again." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped Dean's shoulder, needing to anchor herself. "We have to move now." "But what about Nina?" Victor's jaw clenched. "Barrett's men have her. Crow will want leverage. They'll use Nina to bait us." Dean turned to Rachel, his voice urgent but gentle. "We have an advantage. Echo. He can track Eliza's scent anywhere. She trained him with her own clothes, her own blood, if she was wounded. Crow doesn't know that, but we'll need to move fast." He reached into his coat and handed Rachel a battered satellite phone. "Eliza programmed this with coordinates. She left us one shot to get her out. After that, the trail goes cold." The wind picked up, rattling the hangar doors. Victor checked his weapon. "We'll need a distraction to draw Barrett's men away from the airstrip. Rachel, you and Echo follow the signal. Dean and I will set charges on the fuel dump. Nothing dangerous, just enough to get everyone's attention." For a moment, Rachel wanted to protest, wanted to keep everyone together, to cling to the family she'd just regained, but Echo pressed against her leg, warm and steady. She remembered Eliza's words. "Trust Echo. He'll bring you home." She nodded. "Let's do it." They moved quickly, Victor and Dean slipping into the shadows around the hangar, while Rachel and Echo circled the perimeter. Rachel felt exposed under the moonlight, her breath coming fast, every muscle tensed for action. A minute later, a dull explosion rocked the far end of the airstrip, enough to send a plume of fire into the sky. Shouts erupted from the shed. Rachel ducked low, heart pounding, as Barrett's men scrambled to contain the blaze. Echo's nose went to the ground. He whined, circled twice, then broke into a run, leading Rachel past the hangar toward a snow-covered service road. She followed, not daring to look back. They reached a battered van, its back doors ajar. Echo barked sharply. Rachel edged forward, and inside, she found Nina, gagged and bound, but alive. Rachel hurried to untie her friend, her hands shaking. I thought you weren't coming," Nina whispered, her voice raw. "We're never leaving anyone behind," Rachel replied, her eyes shining with relief. Echo barked again, this time with a hopeful note. He sniffed along the snowbank, then darted around to the side of a low metal fence. There, slumped but alive, was Eliza. Rachel's knees buckled at the sight. Eliza's face was gaunt, bruised, but her eyes burned with determination. "Mom," she breathed, reaching for Rachel's hand. Rachel sank to the ground beside her, cradling her daughter as tears streamed down her cheeks. Echo wormed between them, whining with joy. Eliza hugged him fiercely, burying her face in his fur. Dean and Victor caught up, breathless but triumphant. For the first time in years, the Addams family was together, even if only for a moment. But danger still lurked. Shouts echoed across the airstrip. Dean pulled Rachel and Eliza to their feet. "We're not safe yet. There's a plane waiting in the hangar. We have to go now." They ran, stumbling, supporting each other. Rachel, Dean, Eliza, Nina, Victor, and Echo, toward the waiting plane, as the snow continued to fall, erasing their tracks and giving them, finally, a sliver of hope. And as the engines roared to life and the aircraft lifted into the night sky, Rachel realized that they had not just found each other, they had found the courage to fight for what mattered most. The old plane shuddered as it climbed above the dark ridgelines, snow swirling in the prop wash. Inside the cramped fuselage, Rachel cradled Eliza, her hands trembling as she tried to assess her daughter's injuries, bruises, a cracked lip, fatigue etched deep in every line of Eliza's face, but her eyes, fierce and focused, had lost none of their fire. Echo sprawled protectively between the seats, resting his head in Eliza's lap, as if anchoring the fractured family with sheer presence. Nina sat opposite, wrapping a battered military jacket around her shoulders. She flashed Rachel a shaky smile, her eyes wet with relief and lingering fear. Dean and Victor spoke in low voices with the pilot, working out a plan for what came next. Eliza forced a tired laugh. "You found me. I can't believe you found me." Rachel pressed her forehead to Eliza's, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You left a trail. Echo made sure we couldn't miss it. I'd follow you to the ends of the earth, Eliza. I mean it." Echo gave a soft bark, then nudged Eliza's hand until she was petting him. For a moment, the pain and terror fell away, replaced by the solid warmth of family, bound by blood, by secrets, by loyalty. But as the plane banked sharply to the west, the reality of their situation crashed back in. Eliza looked to Dean. "Crow's not finished. The Foundation is moving everything. They'll wipe out everyone connected to this, including us, unless we act now." Dean nodded grimly. "We have one shot. When the pilot lands to refuel, there's an abandoned desert compound nearby. Coordinates Eliza embedded in the phone. Crow and Barrett are using it as a transfer point before moving evidence and people overseas. We need to hit them tonight." Victor grunted, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a faded tattoo, coordinates inked onto his forearm years ago. "That compound's a maze, but there's a way in through the old utility tunnels. We can't waste time." Rachel's hands tightened on Eliza's. "You're not going in alone. We're together. All of us." The pilot brought them down just outside the Nevada border, landing on a deserted strip marked by broken lights. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as a sandstorm gathered in the east. The air was thick with tension and fear. They left Victor with the plane, armed and ready to cover their escape. Dean took point, weapon drawn. Nina and Rachel flanked Eliza, while Echo slipped ahead, his nose low, his body moving with the quiet purpose of a dog who'd spent his life leading soldiers out of danger. The compound loomed ahead, a half-collapsed collection of concrete buildings, ringed with floodlights and watched by two men in security jackets. Dean signaled for silence, then led the group to a low fence. Echo ducked through a hole, waited for the others, then slunk forward, hugging the walls. Rachel's nerves were raw, every sense heightened. The wind carried the distant rumble of trucks. Nina whispered, "The tunnels are this way. I remember from the blueprints Eliza sent." They crawled through an old culvert, the air thick with dust and stale water, until they reached a corroded grate. Echo pawed at it, then backed up, letting Rachel and Nina work the bolts loose with an old crowbar. The grate slid aside, just enough for them to slip through. Inside, the tunnels felt like a labyrinth, narrow, low-ceilinged, every step echoing off cold stone. Eliza staggered, but refused to stop. "Crows, keeping everything in the surveillance room. If we can get there, we can trigger the lockdown. I embedded a failsafe in their own system, a self-destruct." Dean glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features. "That's risky." Eliza smiled, bruised but proud. "It's all about the timing." They crept deeper, Echo always in the lead. Once, he stopped suddenly, ears perked. Rachel froze. Footsteps above them. 2 guards, their voices muffled by the concrete. Echo looked to Rachel, then darted ahead, finding a narrow shaft and squeezing through. Rachel held her breath, following, her body scraping the sides. At the end of the tunnel, a rusted ladder led up to a vent. Nina went first, then Eliza. Rachel waited, heart pounding, then climbed after them, Echo leaping nimbly up behind. They emerged into a dark storeroom lined with broken crates. Echo sniffed the air, then moved to the door, tail high. Rachel pushed the door open a crack, just enough to see the hallway beyond. At the far end, a guard leaned against a vending machine, bored, scrolling through his phone. Dean and Eliza moved swiftly, Dean tossing a rock down the corridor, Eliza sliding out behind the distracted guard and taking him down with a single, practiced move. Rachel was struck by the transformation in her daughter, no longer just her child, but a fighter, trained and unbreakable. Echo pressed on, leading the group to the surveillance room. Nina hacked the electronic lock with codes Eliza fed her, hands shaking but determined. Inside, the glow of monitors filled the dark. Rachel's breath caught at the sight of dozens of camera feeds, storage rooms, vaults, more guards. Eliza sat at the console, her fingers flying. "I'm setting the lockdown now. 5 minutes, and the whole place will seal tight. But someone's got to get the rest of the evidence out. Mom, you have to lure the guards away. Be loud. Echo will get Nina and the files to safety." Rachel nodded, fear and adrenaline mixing in her veins. She slipped out of the room, grabbing an emergency flare from the wall. She ran through the hallway shouting, "Security breach! Fire in the tunnels!" Her voice echoed through the compound. Guards thundered after her, weapons drawn. Rachel ducked and weaved, letting herself be chased, trusting Echo and the others to do their part. Back in the surveillance room, Echo nudged Nina toward a side door, then led her and Dean into the maze of hallways. Eliza gathered the drives and paper files, sliding them into her backpack. As alarms blared, she triggered the self-destruct, red lights flashing, klaxons screaming. Rachel led her pursuers in circles until Echo appeared at her side, barking. She followed him, running until her lungs burned, until finally they burst into the night air, just as a shockwave rolled through the compound, a contained explosion lighting the sky. They collapsed together behind the plane, panting, trembling, and alive. Victor and the pilot waved them aboard. Rachel gathered Eliza and Nina into her arms. Echo flopped down, tongue lolling, his job done. They took off as dawn crested the desert, the old plane limping through pink and orange sky. In the hold, Rachel pressed Eliza's hand, tears of relief streaking her face. "You did it. You brought us home." Eliza nodded, exhaustion overtaking her. "I didn't do it alone." Echo curled beside them, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel let herself believe that hope was more powerful than fear. They were battered, hunted, and still in danger, but they were together, and the truth was finally breaking through the silence. The flight home was long, quiet, and filled with the kind of exhaustion that seeps all the way into a person's bones. After the adrenaline faded, Rachel drifted between sleep and wakefulness, her head resting on Echo's sturdy side. Eliza dozed beside her, one hand tangled in Echo's thick fur, the other clutching her battered backpack, a lifeline of evidence and memory. Dean sat across from them, lost in his own thoughts, his posture stiff and guarded. Nina slumped by the window, watching the sky pale from indigo to pale gold as the sun climbed over the Rockies. When the small plane finally touched down in Boulder, a strange hush fell over the group. The city was just waking. Grocery trucks on their morning routes, joggers braving the chill, birds darting between snow-laden branches. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt the faintest flicker of normalcy. No one waiting in ambush, no engines roaring behind them in pursuit, only the gentle crunch of boots on her own driveway, and Echo's soft whine as he nudged the front door. Inside, the house was exactly as they'd left it. Photos gathering dust on the mantel, dishes in the sink, the living room cloaked in silence. Rachel pressed her hand to the doorframe, overwhelmed by how unchanged everything seemed on the surface. How many years of secrets and heartbreak were hidden in the corners? They moved through the house in slow, hesitant steps. Dean hovered at the edge of every room, as if expecting something to jump out at him. Eliza sat on the old sofa, exhaling with a long shudder, Echo immediately settling at her feet. Nina wandered the kitchen, making coffee that tasted burnt and familiar, an anchor to something like the past. After the chaos of survival, the quiet felt strange. Rachel realized there was a different kind of work ahead now, one that couldn't be solved with passwords or escape routes. They began unpacking the evidence Eliza had risked her life to save. On the kitchen table, they spread out files, hard drives, letters, everything the Foundation had tried to bury. Rachel watched Eliza pore over every detail, her jaw set, determination warring with weariness. Sometimes she saw flashes of the little girl Eliza had been, stubborn, curious, fiercely loyal. Now she saw a woman forged by danger, her eyes shadowed but her spirit unbroken. The family spent hours sifting through the past. Dean found an old box of letters in the attic, yellowed with age and grief. Most were written by him, never sent, never finished. Apologies, explanations, promises he'd never delivered. Rachel read them with shaking hands, tears running silently down her face. Each word was a confession, a memory of the years she'd spent angry and alone, piecing together a life without answers. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Rachel stepped onto the back porch. Dean joined her, moving slowly, unsure if he was welcome. For a while, they stood in silence, the only sound the wind in the aspens and the faint hum of city life beyond. Rachel broke the silence. "You didn't protect me? You erased me?" Dean didn't argue. He stared at his hands, weathered and scarred. "I know. I was scared you'd hate me more if you knew everything. I thought I was protecting you from the worst of it, but I was just running away." Rachel wiped her cheeks, not hiding her tears. "You left me alone with the silence. I deserve the truth. Eliza did too." Dean nodded, pain and humility in his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry." There was no tidy forgiveness, no dramatic embrace, just the shared ache of regret and the first tentative thread of understanding. Rachel let the words settle in the cool night air. Sometimes that was all you could do. Inside, Eliza had curled up on the living room floor with Echo, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke to him. "You're the only one who was there the whole time. When it got bad, I'd talk to you. You always listened, even when I was scared." "You're more than a dog, Echo. You're family." She stroked his ears, and Echo closed his eyes, tail thumping gently. Nina brewed more coffee and set it on the table, her presence a quiet reassurance that healing didn't have to happen alone. She sat beside Eliza, listening as Eliza talked. Not to a therapist or a government official, but to the one friend who'd never betrayed her. Over the next days, the Adams house became a haven, a place where wounds could be spoken, where stories could be told without fear of being erased. They read Dean's unsent letters, listened to Eliza's encrypted voice memos, and pieced together the story of what had happened and why. The work was slow, sometimes painful, but honest in a way Rachel hadn't experienced in years. Rachel came to realize that healing did not require vengeance. There was no way to undo the lost years, the betrayals, or the lies. But there was power in finally facing the truth together. She found herself reaching for Dean's hand during moments of fear, letting Eliza talk late, into the night, allowing herself to laugh with Nina over burnt toast and bitter coffee. Echo was always there, sometimes pressed between them on the couch, sometimes lying silently by the door, always the quiet guardian of their new beginning. One evening, Rachel found Eliza sitting on the back steps, staring into the twilight. Echo beside her. She sat down quietly, and for a long time, they simply watched the stars emerge. "I always believed you'd find the truth, Mom," Eliza said finally, "because Echo would never stop until you did." Rachel hugged her daughter, the embrace lingering. "I almost gave up. I'm glad you never did." As the night deepened, Rachel realized that scars would remain. The past couldn't be erased, but the future could be rewritten, one honest word at a time. Inside, the family gathered for a simple meal, laughter mixing with tears. They were not perfect, not healed overnight, but willing to witness each other's pain without judgment. Rachel looked around the table and finally understood. Healing begins where honesty returns. It does not erase the past, but it reshapes what comes next. And sometimes it takes a dog, loyal, brave, and unyielding, to remind a broken family how to trust again. Spring had come to Boulder, melting the old snow and painting the hillsides in emerald green. Daffodils and crocuses poked bravely through the thawing earth, and the city buzzed with a quiet hope. Inside the Adams home, life had found a new rhythm, gentler but fuller. Laughter returned in fits and starts, wounds still healing but no longer hidden. Echo lay in the sun beside the kitchen table, his muzzle speckled with gray, his eyes following Rachel's every move. He seemed to sense, better than anyone, how much had changed. But peace hadn't come easily. In the months after their escape, the Adams family had become both witness and catalyst in a wave of revelations. With Victor's testimony and the evidence Eliza had risked her life to save, federal investigators had taken swift action. The Foundation's top conspirators, Barrett, Crow, and half a dozen others, were arrested and charged. The web of cover-ups, black ops, and destroyed lives was dragged, kicking and screaming, into the daylight. It wasn't simple or safe. Rachel faced sleepless nights, worried about retaliation. There were still threats, strangers watching the house, anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. But for the first time in decades, Rachel refused to let fear dictate her choices. She was done being silent. The federal trial was a national event. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Headlines splashed across every screen. Military whistleblowers exposed decades of fraud. Yet for Rachel, the most difficult moment was not facing the world, but facing the truth, publicly, with no place to hide. She took the witness stand, the weight of her family's story pressing down with every step. The judge's gavel sounded, cameras clicked, and the silence in the courtroom was absolute as Rachel began to read. She started not with the crimes, but with her own heartbreak. "I lost my husband to secrets. I lost my daughter to silence. I nearly lost myself to grief. But the truth is, none of us survive alone. We survive by choosing honesty over fear, by refusing to erase each other, even when it hurts." Her voice didn't tremble. She described the coded barks, the encrypted files, the names of soldiers erased from the record. She spoke about Colonel Barrett, Annalise Crow, the betrayals and the pain, but also the loyalty, the small acts of courage that had kept her family alive. She spoke of Echo, the dog who never gave up, who was more faithful than any human in the room. When she finished, the silence was deafening. The judge nodded with respect. The prosecutors asked their questions. The defense tried to poke holes, but Rachel's answers never wavered. She was finished being intimidated. She was finished being erased. In the end, Barrett, Crow, and their collaborators were sentenced. But Rachel, Dean, and Eliza made a private choice. They would not let their story end with revenge. They wanted something better for the future. A month later, standing outside the courthouse, Rachel announced the formation of the Echo Project, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to supporting whistleblowers, survivors of covert trauma, and families broken by secrets. She spoke to a sea of microphones, her voice strong. Truth isn't loud, it waits. And when we finally listen, it saves us. We owe it to every soldier, every family, to witness, not erase, the truth of what we've survived. The Echo Project grew quickly. Donations came in from around the world. Survivors wrote letters telling their own stories, some for the first time. Eliza lectured at military academies, teaching a course called Transparency in Command, emphasizing ethics, accountability, and the need for real human connection even in the darkest work. Dean, still limping but growing stronger, counseled PTSD survivors under an assumed name, offering a quiet wisdom that came only from loss. Rachel became a fierce advocate, but she also learned to let herself rest. She tended her small garden, walked Echo through the blooming meadows, and welcomed Nina, Victor, and their found family for dinners full of laughter and stories. The house, once silent, now rang with the ordinary music of healing. A creaky floorboard, the clatter of plates, a dog's happy bark. One bright afternoon, the Adams family gathered at a community center for a small but deeply significant ceremony. Local veterans, neighbors, and reporters filled the room. Rachel watched as the mayor pinned a civilian bravery medal onto Echo's collar. The big shepherd sat perfectly still, eyes gentle and regal, accepting the honor with quiet dignity. There were no barks, no leaps, just the calm acceptance of a dog whose work was finally recognized. Rachel gave a short speech, her eyes shining with pride. Loyalty isn't blind, it's brave. Families survive not by being perfect, but by choosing each other again and again, even after everything breaks. She looked down at Echo, her heart full. You brought us home. You saved us all. After the applause faded, a journalist asked Rachel if she thought the world would ever be free of secrets. She smiled, her answer honest and steady. No, but we can choose what to do when we find them. We can hide, or we can bear witness together. The real healing starts when we stop running from each other. Later that evening, as dusk softened the sky, Rachel sat with Dean and Eliza on the porch. Echo sprawled between them, snoring softly. Dean turned to Rachel, voice quiet. I sent Echo to you 2 years ago, when Eliza vanished. I knew you'd trust him, even if you couldn't trust me. He was always the best of us. Rachel reached for Dean's hand, squeezing it gently. He brought us back. But so did you. So did Eliza. We all did. By refusing to let the past destroy us. As the stars blinked to life above the Colorado hills, Rachel felt peace settle in her bones. The pain of the past would always linger, but it no longer defined her family. They had rebuilt their lives, not with vengeance, but with honesty, forgiveness, and loyalty that refused to quit. Rachel spoke the words that would become the Echo Project's motto. This isn't just a story about conspiracy. It's about how secrets fracture love, how truth rebuilds it, and how sometimes it takes a dog to guide you home. Echo opened his eyes for a moment, as if he understood, and pressed his head into Rachel's lap. They sat together, witnessing each other's scars, honoring each other's courage, and finally, building a future on truth.